The company was going under. There's one way to save it, my CFO said. What he proposed shocked everyone. My name is Talwin. I'm 42 years old, and for the past 2 decades, I've been at the helm of my family's glass business, Malden & Sons. My great-grandfather, Patrick Malden, started the company in 1924. He built it from the ground up, creating handcrafted glass for churches, mansions, and anyone with enough money to pay for something custom. Over the years, the company grew into a cornerstone of our town in upstate New York. By the time my dad, Eustace Malden, inherited it, we were doing contracts for luxury hotels, office towers, and even some big-name museums. But by the time the company came to me, the glory days were long gone. I don't know if it was the rise of cheap imports or the fact that no one in my family wanted to change the way we did things, but by the time I took over, the numbers were already slipping. For years, I tried to patch the leaks. We cut staff. We rebranded. We even launched a social media campaign, which was humiliating because my dad, who still sat on the board, didn't know the difference between Facebook and a fax machine. Nothing worked. And now, here we were, 2023, drowning in debt, with layoffs looming and creditors breathing down our necks. That's when I called a meeting. My CFO, Nolan Grayson, was already waiting in the conference room when I walked in. He was a sharp guy, mid-30s, Ivy League educated, with the kind of ruthless efficiency you want in a CFO when your company is going under. He sat there, flipping through papers, his face so calm it made me nervous. The rest of the board filed in after me. There was my dad, Eustace, who refused to believe that the company could fail because, in his words, we've survived worse. Spoiler alert, we hadn't. Then there was my cousin, Leona, who only showed up to board meetings because she liked to play the part of businesswoman on Instagram. And finally, my brother, Arlen, who I hadn't spoken to outside of these meetings in almost a year. He was sitting in the corner, arms crossed, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. I started the meeting the way I always did, by laying out the numbers. All right, I said, clicking through the PowerPoint I'd spent half the night putting together. We're down 27% year over year. If this continues, we won't have enough cash to cover payroll by the end of the quarter. We need a solution, and we need it fast. There was silence. My dad cleared his throat like he was about to say something, but Nolan cut him off. There is a way, Nolan said, sliding a folder across the table. But it's not going to be easy. I opened the folder, and what I saw inside almost made me laugh out loud. At first, I thought it was a joke. It wasn't. I'm sorry, I said, staring at the document. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious, Nolan said, leaning back in his chair. This is the only way to save the company. The rest of the room started murmuring, but I wasn't paying attention. I couldn't take my eyes off the paper in front of me. It was a proposal for something I never thought I'd see, selling the company's soul, figuratively speaking. I don't want to go into specifics just yet, but let's just say it involved cutting ties with everything my great-grandfather had built, everything my dad had worked for, and everything I had spent the past 20 years trying to hold together. The room erupted. My dad slammed his fist on the table, shouting about how this was a betrayal of the Malden legacy. Leona said something about how she couldn't vibe with the idea. Arlen, of course, stayed quiet, which was worse than him yelling because it meant he was planning something. And me? I just sat there, staring at Nolan, wondering if I was really about to do this. The room stayed in chaos for what felt like forever. My dad kept ranting about tradition, Leona started crying, about how this isn't the kind of energy she wanted in her life, and Arlen. He just stared at Nolan with this dead-eyed expression. Like I said, he wasn't saying anything, which meant trouble. I didn't say a word. I just stared at the proposal in front of me. Nolan's idea was simple. We sell the company's manufacturing division, the heart of what made us Malden & Sons, to one of our biggest competitors overseas. They wanted our factory, our equipment, and even our employees to cut costs. All we'd have left would be the Malden name and some distribution contracts. In other words, we'd turn into nothing more than a glorified middleman for the very companies that were putting us out of business in the first place. It was the ultimate betrayal. If we did this, the company would technically survive, sure, but it wouldn't be ours anymore. My great-grandfather's vision, my father's hard work, and my own blood, sweat, and tears would be sold off for parts. I'm not doing it, I finally said, slamming the folder shut. Nolan didn't even flinch. You don't have much of a choice, Talwin. If we don't sell, you'll be filing for bankruptcy by summer. Then we file for bankruptcy, I said. I'm not selling out. My dad looked relieved for a second. But then Arlen spoke up for the first time. I think we should sell, he said, his voice flat. Everyone turned to look at him. My dad's face went red. What did you just say? I said we should sell, Arlen repeated. This company's dead anyway. Might as well get something for it while we still can. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Arlen and I didn't agree on much, but I thought at the very least, he cared about keeping the company in the family. Apparently not. You'd sell out your own family? I asked him. Don't act like you're some kind of saint, he snapped. You've been running this place into the ground for years. This is your fault. I wanted to punch him. Instead, I turned to Nolan. You can't do this. You work for me. Nolan shrugged. Actually, I work for the board. And that's when it hit me. Nolan didn't come up with this plan on his own. He couldn't have. He didn't have that kind of authority. Someone put him up to it. Someone on the board. Someone who stood to benefit from selling the company. I looked around the room. My dad was fuming. Leona was too busy scrolling on her phone to even pretend she cared. And Arlen? He was staring at the table, refusing to meet my eyes. It was him. It had to be. Over the next few days, I started digging. I went through every email, every financial report, every contract I could get my hands on. And the more I looked, the worse it got. Arlen had been working with Nolan for months. He'd been quietly selling off company assets, pocketing the money, and blaming the losses on market conditions. The bastard had been sabotaging the company from the inside, also he could force a sale and cash out. I was furious. But I didn't confront him, not yet. I knew I needed a plan. First, I called a lawyer. Then I called an accountant. Then I called a friend of mine who worked for one of the unions we contracted with. By the time I was done, I had a clear picture of how to take Arlen down. The next board meeting was a showdown. Nolan started things off by presenting his proposal to sell the company. Arlen backed him up, of course, and even Leona chimed in with some nonsense about how, sometimes you have to move forward to move up. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up, walked to the front of the room, and pulled out a stack of papers. Before we vote, I said, I think the board deserves to know the truth. I handed out copies of the documents I'd found. Emails between Arlen and Nolan, contracts for equipment sales, and even a private bank account in the Cayman Islands where Arlen had been stashing the money. By the time I was done, the room was dead silent. My dad looked like he was about to have a stroke. You son of a bitch, he said, glaring at Arlen. Arlen tried to defend himself, of course. He said I was lying, that the documents were fake, that I was just trying to save my own skin. But it didn't matter. The evidence was overwhelming. I fired Nolan on the spot. Then I turned to the board. I've already contacted the authorities, I said. Arlen is being investigated for fraud and embezzlement. He's also been removed from the board, effective immediately. Arlen lost it. He started shouting, threatening to sue me, to take me down with him. But no one was listening. Security escorted him out of the building, and that was the last time I ever saw him. It wasn't easy after that. We still had a long way to go to save the company, but at least now, we had a fighting chance. My dad stepped down from the board, finally admitting that he wasn't up to the task anymore. Leona stopped coming to meetings altogether, which was honestly a blessing. And me? I started working with the union to cut costs without cutting jobs. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than selling out. As for Arlen, he ended up in prison. Turns out, the FBI takes offshore accounts pretty seriously. Last I heard, he was still trying to appeal his sentence. Good luck with that. The company is still standing today. It's not the empire it used to be, but it's ours. And that's all that matters. Sometimes, family isn't everything. Sometimes, family is the thing you have to fight against to save what really matters.